It's The Perfect Heart by Priya Sher. A young man was standing in the middle of a town proclaiming that he had the most beautiful heart in the whole village and in the whole valley. A large crowd gathered, and they all admired his heart, for it was perfect. There was not a mark or flaw in it. But an old man appeared at the front of the crowd and said, "Your heart is not nearly as beautiful as mine." The crowd and the young man looked at the old man's heart. It was beating strongly, but was full of scars. It had places where pieces had been removed and other places put in, but they didn't fit quite right. And there were several jagged edges. The young man looked at the old man's heart and laughed. "You must be joking. Compare your heart with mine. Mine is perfect, and yours is a mess of scars and tears." "Yes," said the old man, "yours is perfect looking, but I would never trade with you. You see, every scar represents a person to whom I have given my love. I tear out a piece of my heart and give it to them, and often they give me a piece of their heart which fits into the empty place in my heart. But because the pieces aren't exact, I have some rough edges. Sometimes I have given pieces of my heart away, and the other person hasn't returned a piece of his heart to me. These are the empty gouges. Giving love is taking a chance. Although these gouges are painful, they stay open, reminding me of the love I have for these people too. And I hope someday they may return and fill the space I have waiting." So, now do you see what true beauty is? The young man stood silently with tears running down his cheeks. He walked up to the old man, reached into his perfect, young, and beautiful heart, and ripped a piece out. He offered it to the old man. The old man took his offering, placed it in his heart, and then took a piece from his old scarred heart and placed it in the wound in the young man's heart. It fit, but not perfectly. There were some jagged edges. The young man looked at his heart, not perfect anymore, but more beautiful than ever, since love from the old man's heart flowed into his. Our speaker this morning is Ryan Ruffaner. Very glad to have him here. He's an administrator at a Unity Church in Houston during the day, while going to grad school at University of Houston Clear Lake for industrial organizational psychology at night, a full day. He's also group leader for the Citizens Climate Lobby, which talks to Congress about bipartisan climate change legislation, which there's a chapter of here at this fellowship, and a Braver Angels member, which brings people together from different sides of the political spectrum to talk about polarizing topics respectfully. He firmly believes you can never have enough books, puppy kisses that can melt stress, and truth, honor, and courage, and love. They can all save the world. You don't need health, wealth, talent, or anything external to nurture beauty in your world, he says. Only your mind. We're going to practice how to nurture beauty simply by becoming more aware of the world around us. Ryan will focus on three concepts: mindfulness, tracing to origins, and thouing. Ryan, welcome.
Good morning, y'all. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. So thank you, first of all, for having me here. Thank you for that wonderful story. Thank you for the coffee. I definitely needed that. So a couple of weeks ago, I was watching this video about a place called Yakutsk. And Yakutsk is a place vaguely in the Siberian region. This is a place where it can get to 70 degrees below freezing, where the winters you don't see the sun for months at a time. And it's so cold that at one point, the lady who's narrating the video and showing us around her village, she's showing this little boy on his way to school. He's walking because I think at that time of day, like the engines of vehicles will freeze over, so people have to walk. This kid is all bundled up. He looks like this big bowling ball of cloth. And she says, like, you know, this kid he's been walking for a little while. After 10 minutes of walking in this kind of cold, even if you're bundled up, your limbs will start to go numb. And sure enough, this little boy's been walking for almost 10 minutes before he finally reaches the school, and his eyebrows are frosted over. There's hoarfrost in his eyelashes. And to me, watching this video, especially from a place like Texas, I'm like, oh my God, I would never want to live here. This is terrible. It's inhospitable. It's harsh. It's frigid. And yet, one of the final notes the lady ends the video on is she says, there's no such thing as bad weather. There is only weather and our attitude about it. And that really stuck with me, because if somebody can look at a place like that, a place that to many people would seem inhospitable and harsh, and see the beauty there, what else could we see beauty in simply by changing our perspective? So in that similar vein, I would like to share 3 techniques that I use to nurture my awareness of beauty on a regular basis. Some of them, like mindfulness, will be familiar to you. Others, like tracing to the origin and thouing, maybe not so much, but I think all of them will help. So, okay, let's start with mindfulness, the most common one. I think everybody kind of has a general idea of what mindfulness is. At this point, I think even people who are living under rocks have heard of mindfulness, maybe even have a mindfulness meditation app. But generally speaking, mindfulness, there's a lot of people talking about it, but mindfulness at its core is not about gongs or pan flute music or affirmations or mantras. It's not about adding anything to your experience or taking anything away. Mindfulness at its core is about becoming acutely aware of what is in this present moment, whatever that may be, good, bad, neutral, whatever. Just becoming acutely aware of whatever is going on in your environment, in your body, in your mind, without getting caught up in the constant chatter we find going through our heads at any given moment. I remember something that the meditation teacher and neuroscientist Sam Harris once said. He said, the only thing that exists in any real sense is the present moment. Everything else is a thought about the past or a thought about the future, a thought about something, maybe even a hypothetical scenario. So for example, I have a bad habit of daydreaming a lot. Started when I was a kid, and I loved it. I mean, of course, because in your daydreams, anything can happen, right? You can imagine riding a dragon, and it's like, ooh, I'm riding a dragon. Who would want to snap back to reality in a middle school, you know? But as I got older, I realized there's a couple problems with this. One was that no matter how great your daydreams are, or how convincing your concerns about the future are, in 5 years, you're not going to remember them with the same clarity with which you remember events you actually experienced. And nowhere was this brought home to me more clearly than about a year or two ago when my little brother was going to leave for the Marines. And we had grown up together in the same house, gone to the same elementary school, the same middle school, the same high school. We even at one point went to the same college together. We had been, thick as thieves our entire lives. And now there's an inevitable moment where siblings go their own way. And I really didn't know when I was going to see him again. I knew he wasn't likely to die in combat. He was going in a non-combat role, right? He was Marines in the cybersecurity division. But they were going to take him to California, they were going to take him to Florida, then Georgia, and God knows where else. And suddenly there was this chapter of our life that was closing. And I wasn't sure what our relationship would be like. And I realized that either I could be trapped in my head, concerned about the time I had maybe squandered in the past, or the uncertain future, or I could be present in this current moment. Because God forbid something did happen to him, and I never got to talk to him again or share another memory. And the last opportunity I had to make those memories, I was somewhere else. So I really realized that mindfulness was important. I decided to get serious about mindfulness meditation. Now, in a moment, I'll guide you through a brief mindfulness meditation, but I want to emphasize why this is important for the nurturing of beauty in our own world. There is a teaching in different philosophies and religions, and that is inherent in all great artwork, that beauty is abundantly around us all the time, and all we need to do is realize it. This is what happens, by the way, when you come across a really well-crafted sentence in a story that you're like, yes, that is exactly what it's like. And it can be anything. It can be the feeling of walking into a divey bar atmosphere. It can be the sound of your shoe doing that crunch squeak thing when you step into snow, or that feeling of having a break from work, from school, and having that time open to you. What the artist does is they pay attention to something very closely and then they recreate it. But before they recreate it, they have to pay attention to it very closely. So in terms of nurturing our awareness of beauty, we have to first nurture our awareness in general. We remember things much more vividly when we are vividly present for them. Okay, so let's begin a brief mindfulness meditation. I want everybody to close their eyes and take a couple of deep breaths. It doesn't matter if you're breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth, or in and out through the nose, whatever feels most comfortable to you. And after you take a couple of deep breaths, I want you to simply let the breath come and go as it pleases. Don't force it. Just allow the body to breathe itself, and pay attention to where you feel the breath the most. Maybe that's the tip of the nose, the rising and falling of your chest or belly. Wherever you feel it most, just cover it in your awareness. See if you can become almost nerdily curious about the sensations you feel. The way your body is filled with nourishing oxygen, feeling of your belly expanding, the brief pause between breaths. And if you find yourself distracted by thoughts, just be aware of it. Don't guilt trip yourself. Be gentle and friendly. And try to return your attention to the breath. Okay. Now, wiggle your toes and gently open your eyes. And come back to the present moment. Now, did the way you were breathing, the experience of breathing, feel any different than how you normally breathe on a regular basis? Chances are the answer is yes, and I see some people who are nodding their heads. And if you didn't experience it this time, I encourage you to go home and try with a guided mindfulness meditation that's a bit longer than this brief one. Now, let me ask you this. what changed with your breathing? You weren't breathing any kind of different air than normal. You weren't using any kind of different body parts. It's not like you're breathing through your ears. You're breathing exactly as you normally do. The only thing that changed was your awareness of the breath. And there's a general rule that the more we pay attention to something, the more interesting that thing can become. And if something as simple as the breath can become interesting just by focusing on it, imagine what else could become enhanced through our simple awareness of it. So many things can become that much more interesting just by covering it with our awareness. So the general rule here is if you want to nurture your awareness of beauty, one of the best ways to do that is to simply cover something in your awareness as you just did using this mindfulness meditation practice. And see if it doesn't make that thing more interesting or even more beautiful. The second technique is something called thouing, which is a form of the word thou. I was reading this book not too long ago by Joseph Campbell. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Joseph Campbell. I love that guy. He's sadly passed away now, but he was, for those of you who don't know, a master mythologist. He studied myths and religions and folklore and fairy tales from all over the world. And he brought them home to America in a way that everybody could understand. No highfalutin academic jargon or anything like that. Just simple language with profound stories. And one of the things that I came across in this book was he said that the Native Americans would refer to things in their natural environment as thou, whether it was the buffalo or the sun, the moon, trees, rocks, birds. They would refer to them as thou. And he said that referring to things as thou changes your psychology, because an ego that sees something as a thou is not the same ego that sees something as an it. And I remember having two different reactions at the exact same time when I read this. One of the reactions was, "Whoa, that's incredible, like that's amazing, that's really deep." And the other was, "Yeah, I don't know about that." Just a little bit of skepticism. But at this point in time, this was honestly, it was a couple months into the pandemic during the lockdown, but it felt a lot longer. Y'all know what I mean. I was cooped up at the house. There's nothing to do. Couldn't go anywhere. There were no vaccines yet. And we were just sheltering like we were in a bunker at the end of the world. And the only thing I had to do at the time to really get out of the house and away from it all was to go for walks around my neighborhood. But even that was starting to get stale because this was the neighborhood I grew up in. I had walked these streets thousands of times before. I had seen everything there was to see. There was nothing new to see, nothing new that was interesting, or at least that's what I thought. So I decided to go on a walk and try out this whole thouing thing. I was like, okay, I'm going to call something thou, and it's going to feel a little weird, but nobody's going to know I'm doing it. It's not like I'm going to present this in front of a bunch of people one day. So I go on this walk, and I'm like, okay, let's start with a tree, right? Because if I do it with a fire hydrant, that just seemed kind of weird. So I decided to look at a tree, and in my head I called it a thou. And something did change. Something subtle, yet in a way profound. The tree seemed to become clearer and deeper, and in a way almost magical. In my neighborhood, it's all live oak trees, right? So it's easy to just see live oak, live oak, live oak. But as soon as I called it thou, it really brought it into focus as its own unique being. It was like, okay, well, this one's, the way the bark seems to flow up the trunk of the tree is actually different from that one. The pattern of lichens on this one's bark is different from that one over there, even if only subtly. The way the branches are filled out is different from this one, or the way they're barren in some areas, or there's a little knob of wood here. It's all very different. And I wasn't sure why that was, so I just started thinking about it a bit more, and the reason I came up with was there's something that seems inherently sacred about the word thou. It's not a very common word anymore. For the most part, it's reserved for religious texts, religious terminologies, and indeed our hymn today had some thous and thys in it. And so we use terms like thou and thy to refer to things oftentimes in the religious sense that are higher than us, more powerful than us, more transcendental. Things that were here before us and things that will be here after us. And I think what happened was, in referring to this tree as a thou, I took the commonplace exterior that I was used to seeing and I cracked it open and I revealed its inherent sacred nature. And suddenly this tree seemed like more than just a tree. It seemed like something eternal and transcendent. And so if you ever find yourself in a natural environment, maybe one that you've been in a lot, and you find yourself thinking, well, there's nothing new here to appreciate, I encourage you to try finding an object, especially a natural object, and calling it thou. You don't have to do it out loud. You can do it in your head. Nobody has to know. See what happens. I think you'll find that it unlocks something sacred about the world around you. And the final technique I want to share with you is something I call tracing to the origin. One day I was walking through an art museum in Austin, Texas, and I became aware that there was this feeling that I was somehow doing it wrong, because the architecture of the place was such that there were these high, lofty ceilings and beautiful light. And this thought occurred to me that I was essentially walking through a temple to the human expression of beauty. Right? There are temples to various gods and goddesses around the world. It's always been such. It always will be. But this wasn't a temple to any god or goddess per se. This is a temple to the way that humans could master the expression of beauty within a frame. I was like, okay, this is kind of a sacred place. And yet, I'm passing by most of these classical masterpieces the same way you pass by so many misted vegetables in the grocery store. You know, I was like, okay, well, that one's kind of nice. But most of these, I was like, da, 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 da. And I thought, well, wait a minute. If one of my artist friends came up to me and they said, I painted this, surely I wouldn't just pass by it the way I'm doing to these classical pieces of art. Surely I would find something to appreciate about it because I want to encourage them. And I know that they worked really hard on it. Is anybody in here an artist? Does anybody here do art? Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah. If you do art, or if you know people who do art, then you know that the finished product is only the tip of the iceberg to everything else that went into it. And most of the artists that I know they have these notebooks that are packed full of shadings and scribbles and little experiments and trial runs here. Some of them go nowhere, and some of them add up to a finished work of art that they're really proud of. So I'm going in this museum, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, I'm passing by these things that took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, months, if not years, of people's lives. How can I appreciate them in a way that I would if my friend had painted them? Or if I was the painter, how would I appreciate these better? And I don't know where the thought came from, but a thought occurred to me that said essentially, trace them to their origin. Find the very first brushstroke, or at the very least, the very first layer of paint. And every time I thought I had found it, I was like, oh, here it is. Well, no, there's a layer beneath that. And there's a layer beneath that, and a layer beneath that. And so suddenly all these paintings that I had looked over as something like, oh, that's pretty, but anyways, moving on. Suddenly, I started to see just how much planning and intention went into these. And of course, knowing artists, there was also probably a lot of like, oopsie daisies, I messed up. Let me see if I can fix that and hope nobody notices. You know, those things where you're like, oh, I really like this part of the painting. And they're like, ooh, yeah, I totally meant to do that. You know? So I started doing that, and it was almost like going down into the Grand Canyon, where you see something magnificent, but as you go down into it, you start to realize that each layer depends upon the layer below it. And there are innumerable layers to see and appreciate. In a sort of low-resolution way, what I was doing with this technique was I was reliving the creation of the painting, going backwards in time to its very beginning, to its origin. And this helped me understand and appreciate each work of art more. And again, the more we pay attention to something, generally the more interesting it becomes. And so in paying attention to these works of art more, through tracing them to their origins, I started asking myself, well, what was it about this painting that was so important to the artist to paint? Why this one? They could have spent, weeks and months on a different painting. Why this one? And I started engaging with the painting more. So I encourage you this week to find a work of art, either one you've seen 1,000 times or one you've never seen before, and try tracing it to its origins and see if that doesn't help you appreciate it a little bit more. At the beginning of the service before it started, I did it with the the tapestry here. I started realizing just how much effort went into that. How it was originally this dark, stormy blue, simple design, and then more things were added on top of it. And because it's centered in such a way, there was a lot of planning that had to go into placement and design and color planning. And I started appreciating it on a deeper level. And you can do this with anything. And in some ways, you probably already do. If you've ever wondered about how a great figure in history became who they were, and you started looking back into their past, you are tracing it to their origins. If you ever met somebody who's a big movie buff and they start telling you about how this scene started, how things almost went wrong, how somebody got the idea for this movie, they're tracing it to its origins. They're going back into its past to see how it became what it was from its humble beginnings. So I encourage you to try tracing things to their origin and nurture your awareness of beauty in that way. So to go back, the three ways that we can help nurture our awareness of beauty is mindfulness, first and foremost, because it's hard to nurture our awareness of beauty if we don't have awareness of the present moment in general. And the present moment is all we truly have. Everything else is either a thought about the past or the present. The second strategy you can use is to call things thou, especially natural things. To take what is seemingly commonplace and reveal its inherent sacredness, their inherent transcendence. And the final one is to take something, a person, a place, architecture is also art, a painting, trace it to its origins. What were its humble beginnings? How much effort went into it? And through that technique, to nurture your awareness of beauty. There are, of course, undoubtedly more strategies, more techniques to nurture your awareness of beauty, but I hope you can use these three to make a difference in your life, to make the world around you, which is already so abundantly beautiful, that much more vibrant, that much more magical. Thank you.